Government business. Order of the day number 1, Telecommunications Legislation Amendment, Access Regime and NBN Companies Bill 2015. Resumption of debate on the second reading.
I call the member for Wakefield.
Well, thank you, Speaker, for this unexpected call on this bill. I don't know where the member for Patterson went, but anyway, I'm sure he's got important business in the House elsewhere. Look, fundamentally, what this bill points to is the government's failure to really provide a digital equality of opportunity. And we know that for so long during the Howard government, we often hear those opposite talking about the previous Rudd and Gillard governments, but they don't talk much about the Howard government. 11 years in power, 11 years in power, a critical time for telecommunications and internet infrastructure. And what was done?
Nothing.
I think they had 8 plans over 11 years. 8 plans and no action. And we all know that in 07, and I know the member for Kingston can remember campaigning in 2007 about the internet. The Liberal Party's failure on this policy was writ large. Absolutely. It was writ large, and it was there for all to see. And we were just at the beginning of people's needs for high-speed internet, and that, as we know, has only grown over that time. So let's remember where we began before the National Broadband Network came to be, before this debate came to be. We had dealt with 11 years of inaction in a vital area of microeconomic reform and a vital area of the economy, the growing economy, the emerging economy. For all of the new Prime Ministers, the now Prime Ministers, talk about agility and innovation, his party shows none of that. None of that. And their history is appalling on this. And of course, so when we got to government, there was basically a sclerotic system based largely around Telstra in the main, but Telstra did not have the incentive to invest in high-speed internet in places like Craigmore or in Andrews Farm or anywhere else. What we had was a situation where, in actual fact, there were significant disincentives for them to invest and upgrade their facilities. And I can remember having a discussion with Telstra where they just basically told me that they weren't going to upgrade the exchange in Craigmore, this growing suburb, because there was no money in it for them. They'd put in all the infrastructure and pay for that, and then other carriers would monopolise their market. So we had significant disincentives during the Howard era for investment in internet infrastructure in the then sclerotic copper network. Now, when Labor came to government, we made a pretty bold, I think, and agile and a policy of innovation, and we said we were going to have fibre to the preference. I hear the member opposite cry out flexibility. Well, we said we're going to have fibre to the premise. Now, that took a lot of planning and that took a lot of action, and it took us putting in place the great fibre network, the backbone. And as the member for Kingston talks about, a significant bit of microeconomic reform, removing Telstra as you know, the arbiter of the copper network. Probably the most significant bit of microeconomic reform, and forming the National Broadband Network. So Labor put in place all of the architecture that we now debate. But what we had was, as we know, what we had when those opposite came to power, and I hear my friend from Kooyong, the cult from Kooyong. We know about his leadership ambitions, and we know you might be the next Prime Minister, Josh. You might be the next Liberal Prime Minister. You know, hope springs eternal, Deputy Speaker. Hope springs eternal for the cult for Kooyong. We know great ambitions of the branch members, and indeed his own expectations for himself. expectations. Well, I'm sure the member for Bradfield is possibly a candidate for high office in a government led by the colt from Kooyong. I'm sure he could be treasurer, and we could have a dynamic duo there down there at the table. Perhaps the future of the Liberal Party in the next term, because we know the current Prime Minister won't be leading them. That's for sure. In one form or another, after the events this week, we know that this government is hopelessly divided. And just to remind those opposite, 2 Prime Ministers, 2 Treasurers, 3 Defence Ministers, a revolving door in your National Security Cabinet, a revolving door. It's like a hurdy-gurdy, like a merry-go-round in that place. I mean, the poor old defence officials wouldn't know who they're talking about. How many ministers of communication have we had during that time? I don't know. We've got. Are you the Minister for Communication? I can't ever recall. He could easily be. He could easily be. I think he played some role in that. But I digress. Off the bill, on off the record of telecommunications, because you sort of hear those opposite. They sort of buy into this stuff when they're hopelessly divided. Hopelessly divided. And if those in the gallery recall when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister, when the member for Warringah was opposition leader, he basically gave the member for Wentworth a hospital hand pass. He gave him communications, and he sent him out there with the explicit thing, I think, to destroy the NBN. That was a mission statement. I mean, fancy. I mean, we have here a program of great national significance, as great as the Snowy Mountain scheme. I mean, imagine if Menzies had done that to Chifley's legacy. Imagine if he had sent out a member of the executive to destroy the Snowy Mountain scheme, to destroy the snow. I mean, where would the nation be today? Where would its electricity infrastructure be today if we had an opposition of such mindless destruction? Yeah. But there he was, because in the mind's eye of the member for Warringah, he remembered all those days at Sydney University and the great rivalry that existed even then by these great men of great ambition. I say that facetiously for those listening. So he had in his mind's eye the future rivalry that would play out in a coalition government. And of course, what he wanted to do is fit him up with something that the Australian people would see to be not fitting the national interest, that is, to destroy the National Broadband Network. So we had people waiting 11 years under the Howard government for any action at all, 8 plans in 11 years. I mean, an extraordinary amount of talk and malarkey. You know, we had the 20-year anniversary and everybody was falling at John Howard's feet, and that happens to Prime Ministers. After about 20 years, people start to forget all the bad things, and they forget the inaction on broadband, which cost this nation dearly. So the member for Warringah sends the member for Wentworth out there with a hospital hand pass to destroy the NBN, and of course at great cost to the nation and at great cost to people in Gawler or Craigmore or anywhere else in my electorate, in the rural areas of my electorate, who desperately want broadband so that their kids can get educated, so that they can run small business, so that they can avail themselves of new technology, of streaming television, which sounds unimportant, but imagine if we had a government that set out to not have television. I mean, that's the equivalent these days, to not have the great communication devices, wireless. You know, it's like being against the telegraph or any other bit of progress. I mean, imagine if we had governments that did. Imagine if we had governments that were against radio and telegraph and television, against progress in all its forms, and sent ministers out there to destroy the networks that would. It's the networks. So, and we know. What did they do when they got to government? Well, of course, they appointed this Vertigan panel, which sounds well. It's qualified in Liberal Party terms. It's stacked full of people who don't like the NBN. Stacked full of people who are going to do the government's billing. So, and I've awoken from his boredom and slumber, the member for Bradfield. We don't actually often see much animation out of him, apart from question time and just then. You get him onto certain subjects and away he goes. There's life. It's like awakening the mummy. Remember that movie, The Mummy? That's what the member for Bradfield is like. You talk about the NBN, and it awakens the mummy. But look, these are the broad figures around the record of this great panel and this great minister, the now Prime Minister. A Prime Minister that will not last the test of time. I mean, you just saw this week. I mean, open warfare between two Prime Ministers in the party room. It's extraordinary. And over national security, over the Defence White Paper, and leaks and police inquiries. That is what we're seeing. And you can trace it all back to one event. Like I said, you can go as far back as Sydney University when these two great men, in inverted commas, were there. This great rivalry began. So the member for Warringah gives the member for Wentworth the hospital hand pass, and what did he come up with? Well, fibre to the node. Well, hooray. Well done. Takes us backwards. Said it would cost $29.5 billion, now up to $56 billion for copper. For copper. Remember that? Now, is the Copper Art stores still around? I couldn't remember. Remember Copper Art? They've gone out of business. Remember Copper Art, Deputy Speaker? I don't know if they might have been a South Australian retail store. Everything in there was made out of copper. Everything. Right. Well, they couldn't operate today because the government's the main buyer of copper, this old technology. And anybody who's walked down a suburban street in a new suburb and had even the most cursory look at a pit, you sort of see the little tent up and the Telstra guy would be busily in there. Yeah. If you had even the most cursory look at the pit, it was like looking into, like a cave. Yeah. It reminds me of the Kapunda mines. And I know the member for Kingston has seen them full of water. Yep, she's not the only person who's seen them full of water. So this is the brave new technology that the member for Wentworth embarked upon. He said that the copper would arrive this year. Everybody would have copper or HFC this year.
Tick-tock.
That's now doubled to 2020. He said it would cost $600 a home. It's actually cost $1,600 a home. And anybody who'd taken the most cursory look at those pits or talked to a former Telstra linesman, who have all been sacked now, by the way, or one of those techs, there was great knowledge in those old Telstra linesmen. They had great knowledge of the pits, great knowledge of the technical things. All of that wasted as they were made redundant and pushed off to, sometimes pushed off to contractors, but often made redundant. He said it would cost $55 million to patch up the old copper network. Geez, there was a heroic assumption. It's only blown out by 1,000%. 1,000%, $640 million. And that is an understatement. Anybody who knows these pits, full of water, sometimes full of asbestos, very, very heroic assumption that it would only cost $55 million. He said 2.61 million homes would be connected to pay TV cables by 2016. Alas, it's only 10,000. They said that it would bring in $2.5 billion in 2016, 2017, and that's only $1.1 billion. So it's a $1.4 billion hole in the NBN Co's revenue line. We hear nothing from the member for Bradfield about that. The mummy's returned to his esophagus in a little chamber, the chamber of horrors in which he's in. He says it's not worth responding to. He says it's not worth responding to, and I hear the cult for Kooyong. He's busy. I mean, you can imagine the cult for Kooyong playing fantasy football, can't you, Deputy Speaker? You can imagine him. He's a Carlton. Are you Carlton man? And I know the Deputy Speaker is as well. We'll forgive. Obviously this madness is bipartisan. But 20 years into their 5-year redevelopment plan, sounds like the NBN. Maybe the Carlton Football Club and the NBN new management should get together and talk about progress. But we know that he's playing sort of a fantasy front bench. That's what you can imagine the cult for Kooyong up there late at night, scribbling down who he thinks, and maybe even imagining himself in a war cabinet. I hope I get a Guernsey, Deputy Speaker. This great man, the cult for Kooyong, perhaps his government, and this is just a suggestion, should spend less time sort of focused on themselves and their own sort of divisions, 2 prime ministers, 14 ministers, 3 defence ministers, how many communication ministers, this revolving door that's all around division, and beneath it all, just the ambition, and not ambition for the country or ambition for policy or ambition for progress, but just ambition for themselves and for the offices they hold. And what a distressing thing for the Australian public when they were promised adult government.
I thank the member for Wakefield.